Emily Kershaw. I pronounced that second part right?
You have? That's good.
That's good. I've had a bit of a nightmare today with names. I've already pronounced another guest's name completely wrong in the intro, which...
in the outtakes.
Well, no, we just rolled with it. I just had to own it, but it's going to keep me awake tonight. But your name was a bit more gentle. Don't think I could have taken two on the bounce. So I've ripped this off your LinkedIn. We'll see if you agree.
Hopefully.
So you're a business change specialist, project and change manager, transforming law enforcement and public sector operations, ex-hostage negotiator, agile people-first leader, driving measurable results. You're an accredited project and change manager with a background in policing. You specialise in the design and delivery of strategic business change, transformation and process improvement across law enforcement and the criminal justice sector. Does that sound like you? Have I got the right person?
That is the right person. I mean, it's not that catchy when you have it read back, is it? It's a bit of a
It's
mouthful.
just my voice,
there.
I think.
But no, I would like to think that is a fair sort of representation of certainly the path I've been on for the last couple of years and where I'm at now, the things I enjoy doing and would like to do. So, yeah.
I think you've got such an interesting background, which we'll obviously get into. But when I do the research for these, I try and pick out certain posts that I think might be intriguing or what the listener might want to, or the watcher might want to find out a bit more. And I like to, if it's piqued my interest, I also like to dig into what the reason behind the post was, because there's always a reason, isn't there? So this is what you wrote. Bear with me, listener. Today marks 12 months since I left investigative, policing and stepped into the new world of projects, plans, and endless one-note pages. It's been the steepest and most rewarding learning curve of my career. I've gone from fast-paced, reactive police incidents to long-term strategic transformation work. From leading operational teams to influencing change through relationships, discussions, and well-timed questions. But the biggest lessons I've learned are you can take your old skills with you, communication, leadership, problem solving, and adaptability, travel well. Learning is messy and that's okay. The best progress I've made came from the moments I thought, I've got no idea what I'm doing here. Thirdly, confidence doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from realizing you're capable of figuring it out. Huge thanks to everyone who supported, encouraged, mentored, hired, or just checked in over the last year, especially those who shared their own experiences when I didn't have a clue what LinkedIn was or how to use it. Change can feel chaotic until suddenly you realize you're further than you thought. And if I can do it, so you can. It's emotional, that, isn't it? What triggered that post? Obviously 12 months triggered it, but what?
Yeah, so obviously I made quite a career change from sort of operational policing into project management, granted still in policing at the minute in that role. But that was a really huge change for me, and one that I think probably resonates with a lot of people that have made a similar change or also are in a place where they're considering it. And perhaps a bit of a sad reality is that certainly lots of my peers and friends that I sort of grew up with, if you like, in policing are in a position where they're looking at a similar option. And it can be quite a hard place to be, I think, when you particularly come from quite a sort of an insular world, policing. It is its own little world in a way. It can be quite challenging to sit in that world and start thinking, well, I don't know where I would fit outside of it, because you probably don't know what's outside of it. A lot of us join quite young and stay there for a long time. So it's what you know, really. And I think it's only having come out of that I perhaps have seen just how transferable a lot of those skill sets that you build are. And over the last 12 months, I've had a lot of people sort of contact me on LinkedIn and just ask for my experiences. How did I find it? How did I go about it? Do I regret it? How is it? All questions that I was asking of other people when I was in that sort of situation sort of 2 years ago now. So it's always been important to me that I feel like the support that I had from people in that journey, that I can kind of pay it forwards to other people, I guess. So I just
Yeah.
think it's a big thing for people to know what's out there for them, really.
Yeah, totally. Because you hear a lot about like ex-forces people resettling. And I think, and that's right, you know, but you don't hear as much about people leaving other services like police, ambulance, even teachers. Like, you know, you say that all of those roles can be quite insular until you step outside of it. So it's really, I think we need to hear more stories about people leaving every type of service, not just the armed forces.
Yeah, I think probably maybe where that comes from with the armed forces is it's kind of, or it seems it's an accepted thing that's something that people will do for a period of time, as in sometimes it's a defined service length, isn't it, or whatever. Whereas traditionally policing, it was a job for life. You joined it, whatever you did, and that was what people did right through to the end. And so I think policing finds itself facing a bit of a cultural shift now where people don't necessarily join intending to stay for 35 years anyway. And so it's becoming a more relevant conversation as to people starting to look outside.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's value in it. And like you say, it's not just policing or military, is it? It's a similar process for anyone looking within the public sector, really.
So feel free to share as much or as little as you want, but joining the police, why, how, what was the motivation? What's the journey been like so far?
So it's what I always wanted to do, apart from when I was about 5 and I wanted to be a plumber for a little bit. Yeah. And I even thought about that again when I was 18, but I settled on the police. It's what I wanted to do from when I was about 14. I was a cadet for a little bit, which was like a voluntary thing that you'd go and do every week, a few hours. So I was a cadet at 17, and then I went to uni because they weren't recruiting at the time. So it was during the sort of the original austerity period, if you like. So I went to uni, but was able to join as a special constable. So kind of a voluntary thing that I did alongside uni, and loved it. And that's all I ever wanted to do, really. So joined straight out the back of uni. I was very fortunate with how the recruitment fell, timing wise. So joined at 22 and loved it, and loved it throughout. Didn't leave because I didn't love it anymore. Loved the job in its purest sense of what you got involved in, the difference you could make, the impact you could have, the people you worked with. I loved every single role I did, and I was very fortunate. I did lots of different roles in the time I was there. But I suppose for me, I wanted a job where I felt that there was a purpose behind it and a bit of a real world impact, I guess. Not necessarily in some grandiose change the world scenario, but just it was enough for me to be able to look back and think, oh, I did X for this person, and that had X impact. That's what I enjoyed about it. So
when I hear or read crisis negotiator, there'll be people in like our space now who think, oh, never split the difference. Chris Voss.
Yeah.
Have you read that book?
I have read it. And do you know what?
Is it any, like, you're gonna break the fourth wall now? Is it like he says? Do you have different late night DJ voices when you're talking to different people to calm them down?
Do you know what? You probably do, actually. And I don't think, obviously, like Chris Voss is done it at like your very highest level, some major sort of international scenarios that so probably does earn that kind of Hollywood style glamorous image that comes with it. The reality probably isn't quite that glamorous. Like, you know, for me, a lot of it was late night, over the phone, sort of done from home. You're talking to people over the phone a lot of the time, which is a different dynamic. And particularly, going back to your question, if you are talking to people over the phone in that kind of scenario, actually your voice does matter because you haven't got any visual. You haven't got that connectivity that you would have you and I sat in a room together or stood together, you know, on the street, wherever you are. So how you communicate does become about your voice. And I probably suffer from a little bit of a monotonal, flat voice. So I probably have consciously at times had to be mindful of it. But interesting, I suppose, when you say a crisis negotiator, it will conjure all sorts of different images to different people.
It doesn't help that I'm like, I've watched every episode of 24 Hours in Police Custody. So, and my wife watches Criminal Minds and Will Trent. So it's very police heavy in our house.
Well, people love it though, don't they? When you look at TV listings, quite a chunk of dramas and documentaries are
Department Q.
police, aren't they? Like, yeah.
Has there been any crossover in that skill set? Can you manipulate people now when you're trying to, say get a project budget or trying to get new equipment?
I mean, that's a loaded question with the use of the word manipulate there.
Can you guide
you're leading me down a path.
Yeah.
No, do you know what? When I left policing, it was that role was one that I had really enjoyed, and it probably elongated how long I stayed in policing because it sort of reinvigorated me a little bit and gave me something that gave me back. And when I left, it was probably something that I thought I was leaving behind. And then actually, and I say this all the time to people, it's the skill set that I have undoubtedly used the most because it's in a different context, but it's ultimately about people, isn't it? And it is about, I would use the word influence, maybe instead of manipulate, but they're different flavours of the same thing, aren't they?
I was only messing.
No, I was joking. It's a fair point.
That's probably more of a reflection on how I would use the tools, to be honest, than you.
No, but it is the same thing. I mean, negotiation is ultimately about bringing people to where you need them to be in whatever that context is. And projects is people, isn't it? Ultimately, I don't think many of us have a job that doesn't require us to work with, engage with, manage or influence people to some extent. And I think it's quite quickly, I realised probably the biggest element of project management is that ability to bring people together, and particularly in that context, in negotiating land, you were brought into complex situations full of problems, competing priorities, hidden agendas sometimes, and you're trying to understand, well, what's the real issue here? What's going on under the surface, and how do we need to work around that? And that's not necessarily different to projects, is it? Where you've got different stakeholders with different priorities, different views on things, different perspectives, and actually what you need is a degree of common ground because you're trying to move something forward. So definitely the skill set that I've used the most.
It's just so fascinating, isn't it? I just imagine you've come across all sorts of people in terms of, I imagine you have to build like rapport, like with people who you would obviously who have done X, Y, or Z. And
yeah, I think it's probably, and I was the same going in. So before I did the negotiator training, I think it's quite easy to think that it's about how you talk to people and it's about what you say. I definitely assumed that before going into that process. And actually, it's really all about how you listen to people, because that is exactly as you said, you aren't going to influence anyone if you haven't got a rapport. And your ability to build a rapport quite quickly, but authentically, is crucial. And if you're not listening to that person, you're not going to be able to do that, because you're going to approach that conversation with your own mindset, your own thoughts about it. And actually, this needs to be about understanding their position, their starting point, to sort of build that foundation from it. And that what that rapport looks like and how you get there is absolutely determined to a point by the person you're talking to. And that can be very different. Like you say, that you'd have, in that negotiating situation, you might be talking to someone who's just in a really difficult, lonely place. They're not necessarily a threat to anyone else. The danger is that, how they're feeling towards themselves. Or you could be talking to someone who's absolutely up here. They're really angry about something. They've got a bit of a siege scenario going on. Either they've locked themselves in somewhere or they've locked someone else in there with them. So it's a real different, the context can be very different, and how you would perhaps engage with them might be different, but on the same principles of trying to build that rapport quite quickly to start that communication, I guess.
Exactly, I mean, you'll know far better than me or most people listening, but I read negotiation, I think, well, that is two people who need to listen to each other. Whether that's in your scenarios or whether you're in an interview or dealing with difficult stakeholders in a project. When I left the Navy, I found myself being quite dismissive of corporate scenarios. And that's something I had to put my ego aside for and be like, come on, mate, why are we arguing about this? It's not that important.
Yeah.
Is that something is that something was it a shock going from really high intense, like this actually, everything matters, but I'm just being a bit dramatic to set the scene, but this high intensity scenario that really matters when you're sitting in a boardroom arguing over if it's going to be released on the 28th or the 27th. Like, was that a reset for you? Because again, I can only talk for me. I did struggle with that context switching of corporate environments.
Yeah, and I think it's a valid shift to have to make, isn't it? Because you go from your definitions of risk or threat and reward are one thing in very operational land versus, like you say, your corporate land. So yeah, I think definitely there is always an element of it's very easy to compare. Well, it could be worse. It's not this. It's not that we're talking about, is it? No one's going to die if it's released on the 29th, not the 28th. Yeah. But I suppose it's that it's having to have that responsibility in yourself to understand that actually, yes, the impact might not be life or death, but it might cost a hell of a lot of money, which has your business impact, which has a knock-on onto viability and things. So, but yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing either. I think it gives you a different perspective, doesn't it? Because I think it could be very easy to lose a little bit of that perspective in very corporate environments where you are talking ultimately maybe about, money and figures and KPIs. And I think if you come from a world where you're used to talking about people's lives and safety and things like that, it does give a different perspective. I don't think one is more valid than the other, but it's about being able to adjust that, I guess. Yeah,
I used to be a right knob. This is like very dismissive. Very, well, no one's going to die, are they? But what I had to learn, and I suppose one of the questions is, what advice would you give someone? But you have to shift your ego. I think. Well, I had to anyway, because it is important to them. People have been in corporate environments for 20 years and they've worked just as hard, and it's just as important to them. It's not either one's fault that they don't know the other's context. Yeah. You just have to find that balance.
And it's understanding your role, isn't it? That your role in a previous environment was something, and now your role in this environment is a little bit different. Yeah. How long did it take you to get the switch?
About 11 years. No. Probably longer than it should have. But I was relatively young when I left, and I still had some growing up to do. So about maybe 2-3 years. Yeah. That's not to say I've always, I've been perfect after that.
No.
But it does take a long time. What's been the biggest sort of challenge moving over to the corporate side while still being in that world? Like,
I mean, I think that learning curve was probably shortened a little bit because I stayed in the same industry. So I understood the operations, the context, the cultures, the politics and things like that. But I think probably the biggest challenge for me was, that change in position took me from almost being at quite towards the bottom of the ladder, of the hierarchy, if you like, to suddenly engaging at a very different level, sort of quite routinely, which was really interesting, not necessarily because it changed particularly how I was or how I engaged, but it just almost changed how I understood myself in a way. I kind of went from a scenario where I was, a sergeant on a Friday to a project manager on the Monday, dealing with, the mid upper levels of the organisation. Whereas previously, the conversations I was now having and people were bringing to me were ones that would never have crossed my desk before, purely not because I was any different, but because I sat in a different part of the organisation. And I think that is a bit of a realisation to make, not necessarily a negative one that that's why I made the change. That was part of what drew me to it, was being able to be a part of those conversations and actually have a role to play in it. But yeah, that was probably the thing I noticed the most and the quickest, is just how simple that title change and role change really put me in a different standing, really.
Yeah. This is a naive question, but I'm thinking of the people watching, listening to this. So I'm assuming you were in one area.
Mm-hmm.
We'll use the Friday, Monday example. Were you dealing with the same people on the Monday, or did you have any interaction beforehand with the people you are now?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So not directly, because I also changed organisation. So
Okay.
I was an operational officer in one force and then moved to a different force to be a project manager.
Okay,
so
so
there wasn't that overlap of people. But had I stayed in the same organisation, yes, there would have been, because the operational and kind of corporate sides of policing do always converge, because a lot of the functions, obviously, ultimately it goes back into your operational ladder. So no, not directly, but the same ethos, really.
Yeah. Did that give you a chance to sort of go in fresh then?
Yeah.
Or did people know that you were?
People knew that I had been a police officer at a different force, and I think that was to my advantage, really, because it kind of it allowed me to say, well, I understand the challenges you're talking about here, or I've done this, I've experienced that. So I think I found that quite helpful. But I equally found it helpful going into a different organisation where I wasn't known for being a cop.
Interesting. So again, thinking of the people, I keep pointing over there. Sorry. How did you, or what was your sort of, maybe not step by step, but you obviously, or I'm assuming, you decided you were going to make a change into project management, and there was a gap in between.
Mm-hmm.
For someone listening who might be thinking, I want to do the same, the context might be different, but what were the steps you took to make sure you were in the right position to move across to project management?
So when I was looking to leave, I had a couple of different options. I looked at the project and the change route. I was, at the time that I was looking to leave, I was in a fraud-based sort of economic crime environment, so that kind of opened some other potential sort of more investigative type roles, but in different sectors. But when I was looking at the project element, there was a lot out there. And if you do look at police officers that move on, I think it can be quite a natural skill set fit. So there is quite a few people out there that have made that change. And then you start reading about it. And again, for teachers doing the same, you can kind of see how you've already done it in a way. Yes, a different context, you might not have called it a project. Your job title certainly wasn't a project manager, but you've delivered something in the same way that you would approach a project. So I suppose I started by looking back at what I'd done to see how that could evidence something. Looking out at the training, kind of trying to understand what would I need to demonstrate, because I think when you're trying to change your job title, you need to be able to some degree tick a box that you might not need to second time around. So I was looking at different training avenues. Obviously, you've got your obvious kind of your Prince 2, your Agile, your different bits, but it's a minefield because you don't necessarily know what you need or what you need to look for.
Just a sidebar from that, sorry to interrupt.
That's all right.
Do you get resettlement when you leave the police? Like, is there any help? No. Okay.
No, because you've ultimately, like, it's no different to me handing my notice into any job. You're just choosing to leave. There's no kind of, it's probably a little bit different. I know for the military, if you there's a lot more wraparound for that.
Probably should be for police, really, but that's a different debate, probably.
Yeah.
But
different kettle of fish there.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So you looked around.
So yeah, decided on some training courses to do. So I did the Agile PM Foundation, and I did the Change Management Practitioner one through the APMG, because I recognised that asked for, and it was going to sort of start exposing me to the processes, the language, if nothing else, the methodologies of it, and also it was a big thing for me. I didn't want to just throw myself into project managing assuming that I was going to enjoy it.
Yeah,
and so it made sense to do some kind of research into it before you commit yourself to a new career that actually then you get there and find out it's not what you thought it was. So a little bit of that, but then just The biggest thing for me and the biggest facilitator of me moving was talking to people. And that was almost exclusively through LinkedIn, really. And it's such a good, I know it gets a lot of stick and I understand why it does. But if you use it well and you're quite mindful about it, the people that it can lead you to and just the knowledge, the experience, the insight is just almost endless. Yeah. So I think it was a really good platform for me to look at what have other ex-police officers gone on to go and do, and then have a conversation with them. And how did you get there? What did you do? What did you learn? What did you do that you perhaps in hindsight wouldn't bother doing again? And I think it was invaluable for that. So that was a huge part of my process, really. And
you've obviously been sharing a lot more. Like, what's been the motivation behind that? I imagine, again, this is my assumption, there's probably a lot of stuff you couldn't share about your job and lessons you've learned from, a few years ago. Like, what's the, but now you're sharing lessons, project management, it's all really good stuff. Like, what's been the thinking behind that?
I think it's nice to be in a position where you can. I think there's still a degree of mindfulness around that because of the nature of the industry and the service, if you like. Yeah. But again, going back to kind of the idea that I think I benefited so much from other people's input and advice, and not even necessarily actively, but just seeing what other people had done was so motivating and reassuring that actually you can do it. It is possible. And so if I post something and somebody out there reads it and thinks, oh, well, maybe I could do that. Great. I don't necessarily need to know about it. It was such a big part of my process. And like I say, I've had so many conversations with so many police officers, not ones I know, people that do send you a message on LinkedIn and say, oh, I'd be really interested in how you found it or how you've done that. And what, people asking me the same question you just have, like, what did you do? Like, not everyone's going to message you though. So some people might just read it. And I just think if it costs me nothing to put something out there, if people read it and think, what a load of rubbish, that's fine. Scroll on by. If someone reads it and thinks, oh, that's interesting, then great. Because I benefit from other people posting stuff.
Okay. Have you got any other specific advice? Again, people don't want to message you, but they may watch this. Apart from what you've said about if people are looking to do some sort of career transition, is there anything else that you haven't mentioned that you think, I didn't do it, but I would do it now if I knew about it then, or anything you've missed out?
I mean, I'm by no means, don't ever pretend to be a career coach. I have no formal anything around it. And I think there's lots of people out there that are doing fantastic work in that space, particularly for police officers or the blue light type thing. So I think there's a lot of resources out there and people that do offer a very tailored kind of either a support and coaching service or a CV writing service and things like that. And I think they're really good networks to get yourselves involved in, even if you do it quietly. So when I was first starting to think of leaving, there's it's called Blue Light Leavers. So it's not just for police officers, it is for the whole blue light family. But I would suggest probably predominantly the main cohort in there is probably officers. And that's been around a long time in various, it's on Facebook, it's different platforms, and it's just a fantastic support network, really. So I set myself up made a little Facebook account, which I don't normally have. It was all very blank, purely to be a part of that group. And I quietly read. Yeah. Didn't particularly speak in there, but you would just see so much sort of input from other people about what they've gone on to do, that it was quite kind of motivating. So there's lots of things out there and other similar groups and places that people can go that I always suggest people, particularly if they're in that place of not really knowing what they want to do. Because like I say, you don't necessarily need to know exactly what you want to do. And I think probably the biggest thing for me, and that I say to people is, I don't think if you leave the police, the role you go into has to be the forever role. And I think there's a real tendency, because policing's so secure as a career, and it is probably something you join thinking you do it for 35 years until you retire, and it's a job for life, and it sells itself as this big family and all these things, that when people are trying to navigate stepping out of that mentally, I think it's understandable that we look for security and this was definitely the right thing because it's totally secure and I love it and I'm going to do it forever. And actually that can almost become a little bit of an over-facing pedestal that you've put this next role on, and then suddenly you start comparing, well, maybe I won't like this little thing. What if it's not perfect? I don't think it needs to be perfect. I think it's just about making that shift and accepting that it might be something you do for a year, 2 years, 5 years. Maybe you will do it for 20 years, who knows? But I think if you set your stall out that it's got to be a forever role, you probably immediately limiting what you're going to look at and how you go into that process. So I think that's probably
I think that's really helpful.
Quite relevant.
Would it be easy to, I'm not saying anyone should have this mindset, but I think one of my things was when I left the Navy, I would just rejoin because I know they're desperate.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it's as simple as that in the police because the numbers the recruitment is a bit different.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the recruitment it can be quite a complex landscape. But as a principal, I think it's 5 years now, so you can rejoin within 5 years at the same rank that you left at. That's not a God-given right. I think the force that you were applying to would be entitled to say no, but it is an option. And, policing is always going to need more than it's got. And I think if an experienced ex-officer came knocking on the door and said, I had 10 years in, 15 years in, I'd like to come back, I would be very surprised if forces turned around and said, no thanks, on the principle that you left before. So I think it is a factor. It can be a little bit of a security net for people that, and 5 years is a long time in a way, isn't it? Like it used to be shorter than that. But
COVID was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It goes like that, doesn't it?
It's like a lifetime ago now, isn't it?
Yeah. Obviously, the name of the name of the podcast, so I have to ask, based on your experience, thoughts on Agile from what you've seen as someone maybe coming into it. You probably see stuff on LinkedIn. Like, what are your thoughts on Agile as a whole so far?
I think so. I'll caveat this by saying that I think because of the nature of my role and then compounded probably by the nature of the industry, I don't think I've worked in a truly agile sense in the sense of the project management world.
I think there'll be a lot of people who can relate to that.
Yeah, and I think there's so much value to it. So when I looked at the training, I looked at Prince 2, I looked at Agile, and I did Agile because I felt that it suited my personality and my approach a little bit more, and also the world that I recognised, which is quite quickly changing and quite complex and needing things to be done quickly sometimes. But I equally think that Agile can be used as a bit of a prefix and not really in the sense it was meant. So I think it's quite easy to describe something as, we'll take an Agile approach. And what is meant by that is potentially not what it was meant to mean in terms of how that project is run. Like for me, Agile is quite dependent on your culture and your organisational culture. So if you're wanting to create project teams that are very empowered and able to make the decisions and be collaborative and, adaptable to different things, then they need to be empowered. And that kind of starts to tie into, how are decisions made? And I don't think that policing culture and structures necessarily foster that naturally. I think there can be a bit of a clash because obviously policing is ultimately structurally hierarchical and can still be quite command and control led in its sort of design, even not necessarily just in operational land, but even sort of in sort of the back end of the office in the corporate land as well. So that, I think, doesn't necessarily lend itself to an agile approach. But I think it's easy to use the terminology to say, well, we'll be agile. Well, what we mean there is we need to be flexible in perhaps how we go about it, or we accept we might need to change the scope quite quickly. But agile as the project methodology, I don't think fits very easily in some quarters of policing style management, just because of the governance. It can be quite slow. It can be very bureaucratic because it's public sector, so it's public money and things like that. So it's not wrong. It's not a criticism, But I think it's very easy for organisations to say they're agile without necessarily actually building an environment that means they are.
Yeah. I like that. It's the same in like things like the defence industry.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget, I was working with a defence client, and on the first week, this individual said to me, "What you've got to remember, Jack, is this industry was built on secrecy. So you can talk about transparency and openness all you want. But you see those buildings over there? There were some spies in that building just watching people come in and out. Because this isn't like, and I was like, oh, that hit me like a stone in between the eyes. Sometimes it's just not possible.
No, and I think you can take that principle and apply it, back to policing, for example. It is very, yes, decision making is delegated down within certain parameters to certain places, but ultimately it is at its very nature hierarchical. And if the person above you or the person above them says you're doing this, that's what you're doing. Yeah. So that kind of how empowered teams and structures are beneath it kind of hinges on the agreement that exists above it still. Yeah. So that agility can be slightly harder to achieve, I think, in practice.
What's next? What else is on your mind?
So moving on over the next few months into a different industry completely. So moving into a sort of private healthcare pharmaceutical company and into a slightly different role. So a more focused change manager role.
Can I just, when you told me out there, I thought you said farming.
Can I tell you right?
So I was like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what. Oh, right, okay. But then you just said farmer.
No.
I was like, oh, that was me not listening. I thought you were going into farming as a change manager. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. But
if there was a job, right, that you would couldn't be less likely to find me, it's farming. I just don't, fair play to them. I don't know how they do it. They're up at like 3:00 in the morning.
Yeah. Sorry, I totally
definitely
derailed
not.
You then.
Who knows? Maybe we'll cross paths again in a few years and I could be knee deep in a field full of cows doing farming. Maybe that's my true vocation. I don't see it. No, so pharmaceutical type company. So they've got a lot coming, a lot of new stuff coming up, and they're looking to set up a change function within the business. So to go and be a part of sort of building that and steering what that looks like. So really looking forward to it. I think it's kind of that people side again. It's the people side of projects, isn't it? Change management. And that's what I was always very drawn to, because it's what I always found quite frustrating, having change done to me when I was in the job and perhaps not feeling like there was a seat at that table, or perhaps that understanding of how change is delivered really shapes, probably to a greater extent, the success of it, as opposed to what the change itself is. So something completely different, another change, different industry, like I say, different lens on the world. But yeah, really looking forward to it.
Any final thoughts? Anything else on your mind?
No, I don't think so. You put me on the spot there. I immediately go blank with questions like that.
That's all right.
Suddenly there's nothing on my mind at all.
It's okay. Sometimes people go, actually,
while I'm here.
Yeah. You're a prick. No one's ever done that yet. Not on camera anyway.
Not on camera.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thanks for having me.
I think that was genuinely really insightful. And I think anyone listening, watching, who is thinking about changing from that sort of career, I think, like you said before, if you've helped one person, which I think you will have helped more than one, it'd be worth it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.